going to talk today about the brain and how it works and how it's involved in anxiety. So first I thought I'd show you what the brain looks like, really. So this is pretty scary stuff, but this is a skull and this is the brain inside it. What I really wanted to show you is what we know about the brain and how it works in anxiety. And if we take this out, so we as humans have a very large cortex, which is this part of the brain, which is the thinking part of the brain, and is probably the most developed of any other species. So it's much bigger, this part of the brain, than other animals. So this is what is involved with our thinking. Then there's a middle part of the brain here, which is involved with emotions and reacting to things. And then there's what's called the lower part of the brain, because it's lower down, which is this part here, which is the brain stem. And in this part of the brain, there's things like systems that control your heart rate, your breathing rate, whether you sleep a lot, and whether when you get anxious, that your heart rate goes up and your blood pressure goes up. So we've all got that, and that's really important. And over recent years, we've been able to look at the brain with neuroimaging, and that's allowed us to look literally inside the brain. So not only can we see which parts are bigger or smaller, but also which parts of the brain work when we're feeling anxious or when we're feeling sad, which parts of the brain light up, and they literally do light up. They look busier than at other times. So that's really allowed us to look inside our own heads and really get an understanding of how and why we react like we do. So from that work, we've really been able to work out what happens when we feel anxious. So we all feel anxious at times, and we need to feel anxious and be able to respond very quickly, because that allows us to get out of situations easily and allows us as a species, like other species, to survive when we're in dangerous situations. So if we think about how that works when we're looking at this model of the brain, what happens when we see something or hear something, or now when we feel something, like as the ground shaking, reminding us of the earthquakes? That information needs to get into our brain. So it gets into our brain by seeing it, or hearing it, or feeling it, feeling the ground shaking. And that information goes up into the brain, and it goes into this middle part of the brain, which is a bit like a computer, which collects all that information, and then it sends pathways up to the thinking part of the brain and says, do I need to be frightened about this? And then it sends pathways to our memory parts of the brain, which are sort of inside here, saying, have I felt frightened by things like this before? And then it gets that information back and it says, yes, I need to feel anxious. And it sends pathways down to the lower part of the brain here. And that sends signals out saying, make your heart beat faster, breathe more quickly, you need to get out of here quickly. And it coordinates those responses that makes our muscles collect blood and allow us to literally run out of a situation. So those kind of effects we all have, and we can all feel when we need to at certain times, because we have to be able to do that. What we learn, though, is that over time, sometimes situations that we thought were dangerous, we learn that actually we don't need to have that anxiety response to remove ourselves from the situation. That we learn that, for example, with the aftershocks, that every time there's an aftershock, it doesn't mean there's going to be an earthquake. And very slowly we start to control those responses. And that's part of this thinking part of the brain, taking control of this lower part of the brain, saying, it's all right, you don't need to panic, you don't need to run away from this situation. And very gradually, over time, these thinking parts of the brain take control of the lower brain and stop us feeling anxious all the time. for some people, the anxiety does go on. And that's because this whole system is just too activated. It's not switching off. It's not learning that it needs to gradually reduce the anxiety response. So, for example, we still feel very shaky, our heart rate goes up when we feel an aftershock. We're not sleeping very much, we're constantly on edge expecting further aftershocks or further earthquakes. And the whole system gets very sensitized and keeps firing all the time. And that's really difficult and really unpleasant. And that's what some people are finding, although it really isn't the majority. For people like that, then we might be thinking about what can help that. And really what helps is helping the brain strengthen this part of the brain and the pathways down, controlling this overactive lower part of the brain. So teaching people techniques that can strengthen these pathways and stop this part of the brain firing off unnecessarily and too much. And for some people, treatment like that is required. But for most people, they'll find that it's a matter of time and learning from our experiences that just because we're feeling aftershocks, we don't need to be having a panic response. And we're gradually controlling these overactive responses. And things start settling. So the sleep starts settling, you start feeling less on edge, less jumpy, less panicky every time there's an aftershock. But it does take time.